Armed militias are surging like never before as President Trump defends the Kenosha shooter, Kyle Rittenhouse. In this video, we're going to take a look at what scholars are seeing as the role militias play in civil wars, how armed militias and law enforcement are forging new alliances throughout the nation, and how President Trump's support of Kyle Rittenhouse shows that this new alliance is just beginning. You are not going to want to miss this. Greetings, everyone. Dr. Steve here with you. Great to be with you as always. If this is your first time here at this channel, I post 2 videos a day analyzing current events, analyze some super awesome conservative trends so we can all live in the present in light of even better things to come. So if you haven't already done so, you know what to do. You know, make sure to smash that bell and subscribe button. It'd be an absolute privilege to have you as a regular part of this channel where each and every day we together celebrate, yes, the inevitable collapse of left-wing globalism and the unstoppable rise of a new conservative age. But first, before we do anything else, make sure to click on that link below and head on over to my special website for My Patriot Food Supply. As we saw with the whole pandemic insanity, we can't wait for an emergency to happen before we respond to one. And no one makes preparing for an emergency more ridiculously easy and affordable than My Patriot Supply. Gang, they're a good friend of this channel. They're simply the best. Their food kits last up to 25 years in storage. They include breakfast, lunches, and dinners. And best of all, they have a guarantee policy that'll absolutely knock your socks off. And now, if you act today, you can save $100 off a full 4-week emergency food supply when you click on that link below to my special website. You heard that right, 100 smackers off, so don't wait. I've got my food supply. Make sure you get yours. Click on that link below or go to preparewithsteve.com and save $100 off your very own 4-week emergency food supply today. All right, gang, let's dive right in here. A number of pieces have been written of late observing the massive spike in armed militia membership throughout our nation. It's been going on now for the last several months. One of the reasons we've been following this surge over the last several weeks is because scholars see militias, particularly pro-government militias, as a prominent feature in civil wars. We've seen this in domestic conflicts throughout the world, but most particularly in Colombia's civil war between 1948 and 1958, which counterinsurgent experts see as the most likely analogy of what a new American civil war could look like. Dr. David Kilcullen, an expert in counterinsurgency, we've talked about him before, he's wrote a fascinating piece of late, which argued that if a civil war were to break out in the United States, it would, it would of course be highly unconventional and would most likely resemble the Colombian civil wars. Those civil wars, ironically enough, began with racial riots in the city of Bogota over perceived social and racial inequalities. Those riots and the violence and the destruction that characterized them were then exploited by their political leaders, particularly the Colombian Liberal Party. And they mobilized, the conservative politicians mobilized the rural support, the support in the exurbs, to start to take on the radicals in the urban areas. And so here in the States, we're seeing something rather comparable with the rise of urban versus ex-urban hostilities, with armed militias rising up together with law enforcement. That's clearly siding with it, and in many respects joining these armed militias to defend suburbs and exurbs from the chaos that has engulfed so many of our cities. Los Angeles now being the latest city on the brink of rioting and looting in response to another police shooting. Now, there have been a number of articles reporting on the fact that thousands of both active and retired law enforcement officers have indeed joined militia organizations over the last few years. And we can only imagine that that number has swelled given how lawmakers were so quick to disavow the police and start spewing out the whole defund and disband nonsense. This anti-cop culture so pervasive on the left is only contributing to the surge of militias throughout the nation. This is a surge that has actually been going on for some time now. Back in 2017, PBS did a report highlighting a noticeable surge in armed militia activity and membership. Today, as we speak, there are well over 500 militia groups in the United States. That's more than double the number in 2008. And the massive enthusiasm that law enforcement have for these pro-Trump militias seems to be taking the media off guard. The left-wing activists disguised as journalists in the mainstream Marxist media, they just don't seem to know how to respond to this surge, both in terms of the numbers and the support that law enforcement has for these armed militias. So as far as the Washington Post is concerned, police can't control armed militias. They're looking at what they're calling white armed militias showing up at, yes, they're still using the term, these peaceful protests against racial injustice. And police aren't doing anything about it when the militias showed up. And as a result, the threat of violence at these peaceful protests that would be wholly and completely peaceful if it weren't for these armed militia groups, the threat of violence is increasing every day. I kid you not. This is what passes for journalism today. Look at this statement. This is from that article in the Washington Post. Even as Trump greatly exaggerates the danger posed by those demonstrating against systemic racism and injustice. Yes, you heard that right. The riots that now even Don Lemon of CNN is denouncing because it's destroying Joe Biden's election chances. These riots, they're being exaggerated by Trump. But nevertheless, Trump is ignoring and at times himself inciting a potentially much deadlier threat. Heavily armed white militia members showing up at Black Lives Matter protests with the purported goal of protecting against property damage and injuries to civilians. Gang, this is the Washington Post. And then the piece makes this assertion, quote, local police aren't ready or able to confront these militia members who often show up at rallies carrying assault rifles and dressed in uniforms that make them virtually indistinguishable from law enforcement agents or the National Guard. In some cases, police have welcomed them. Two observations here. Why is the Washington Post suddenly concerned about the police confronting anybody? The entire reason militias are surging and marching into these cities is precisely because left-wing Democrat mayors have ordered police to step down from confronting rioters and looters. This is precisely why patriotic citizens have had to step into the gap left by these feckless leftist mayors and governors and city councils. Remember, Democrat-dominated city councils like the one in Seattle actually threatened their mayor, Jenny Durkin, with impeachment if she didn't side openly with the rioters and looters. So why is the Washington Post all of a sudden so concerned about local police confronting supposed threats to civil safety? Heads I win, tails you lose. That's the partisanized logic of the Washington Post, at least it seems. But secondly, they are recognizing, they are admitting here that police have actually welcomed armed militias. And yet they don't even try to hide both their shock and their contempt for law enforcement's embracing of armed militias. And again, I mean, this is head scratching. This is left-wing absurdity at its finest. What the hell do you expect police to do when you in the mainstream media cheerlead these BLM activists and leftist mayors and city councils' collective call to defund and abolish the police? What the hell do you expect them to do? But this latter observation that law enforcement and armed militias are indeed forming alliances and coalitions of sorts throughout the nation, that is increasingly being recognized and acknowledged by the mainstream media. And so they decided to spin it. And they're spinning it in thoroughly racial terms, thus stoking racial tensions in our nation. That's what the leftists at the British Guardian are doing. Check out this headline. God. White supremacists and militias have infiltrated police. Or how about this one? Armed white men patrol U.S. streets, stoke fears amid protest. Do you see the rhetorical trend here? Democrat politicians order law enforcement to stand down and allow riots to run amok and ravage their cities. All the while they blame law enforcement for the riots in the first place based on this myth of, racist police. Armed citizens stand in the gap of this enforced lawlessness, and they're depicted by the mainstream media, which serves as cheerleaders for the riots and the BLM cause. They depict these armed citizens now as white supremacists. So I hope you're picking up on this whole racial meta-narrative here, because it really is, we've talked about on other videos, it really is at the heart of cultural Marxism, going all the way back to the Frankfurt School in the 1930s and 40s that came over here to the United States through the universities. By the way, you'll be interested to know we've actually done a whole series on Black Lives Matter and the rhetoric of discrimination, disparity in our special video series. It's available only to our members of Turley Talks Insiders Club, which you can join by clicking on the link below in the pinned comments section below. If you want more access to me and to this global network of conservatives all over the world, you will definitely want to become a Turley Talks Insiders Club member, which you can do simply by clicking on the link below today. But this kind of racial rhetoric has a long history to it, and the mainstream media is pushing it big time as we speak. Now, in a related front, I'm sure many of you heard that President Trump has come out in defense of Kyle Rittenhouse, the 17-year-old who shot 3 people in the Kenosha riots, killing 2 of them. Video has surfaced surrounding the shooting, and President Trump at the press conference said that he probably would have been killed, his fellow Kyle, if he didn't use his weapon. So Trump is indeed giving his support to Kyle, both in terms of his acting in self-defense, as well as the fact that he would never have had to act in the first place or even just be there if Democrat politicians didn't deliberately abdicate their law enforcement responsibilities. In fact, President Trump has made it clear that he will not, under any circumstances, denounce armed citizens standing in the gap if leftist mayors and politicians have ordered their police force to stand down, like we've seen over and over again in Democratic-ruined cities like Portland and Seattle and Minneapolis and Baltimore, and the latest, of course, here in Kenosha, Wisconsin. When rioters were looting and burning down businesses, police simply did not stop them. The armed couple in St. Louis, right, the McCloskeys, they said they originally called the police several times to come and help them mitigate what they perceived to be an increasingly violent mob in their neighborhood and outside their home. And the police, the St. Louis police, simply refused to respond to the call. And so they took matters into their own hands. They both spoke, of course, at the Republican National Convention, giving their full support to President Trump, who has given his full support to them and their right to defend their home. And now in the same vein, Trump is publicly supporting Kyle Rittenhouse. So there's no question we seem to be seeing the civil unrest in our nation escalating, and we'll most certainly be keeping our eyes on how things develop in the days ahead as we approach the November elections. Now, before you go, make sure to like this video, comment down below, and subscribe to my channel. And you'll definitely want to check out my latest video I just uploaded on how the killing of a Trump-supporting patriot in Portland may indeed be sparking a civil war, all as outraged voters turn against the Democrats. You're not going to want to miss that. So make sure to click on the link, and I will see you over there. God bless.